It being the 4th of August, 4 o'clock, call our meeting to order.
Excuse me.
First order of business, is there any public comment that otherwise isn't going to be discussed as part of our agenda?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to give kudos to Steve Morey for doing a lot of digging in for our last meeting, and for David for taking all of that digging in and putting it into a usable script. So I just want that to be part of the record. Both of them did an excellent job of representing us.
Well, and I think, thank you, John, and a special thanks to Stephen, because he clearly spent a lot of time on that. So, do we have minutes?
There was minutes for, I didn't get a chance to look at the 27th, so I included the 14th of July.
Okay.
So at the next meeting that we have, we'll bring the 27th. Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Do we want to act on the minutes, or do you want to defer them until next time?
We do the 14th.
Okay.
Do we have
14th.
Do we have quorum?
We do.
Yes. We do?
Yeah.
Oh,
We just need 5.
5. Oh, okay.
4 or 5.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Yes.
So moved.
Yes.
Second.
Just discussion. Okay, in favor?
Aye.
And we'll do the 27th
At the next meeting.
on the next meeting. Okay. So what we're going to start out with is a review of some work that Brian and Brian, Julie, you've been working on it yourself.
It's the two of us. And
The
then,
dynamic duo from the finance office on some indicators with the idea that, and some long-term budgeting, which I don't think you're going to show us today.
no, that's correct.
But I've had the opportunity to take a look at the work that you guys have done, and it's terrific. I think your goal ultimately on the long-term budgeting is to have a rolling 5-year forecast?
Actually, 7, but yeah.
7-year forecast. So of the entire expense side of the operation of the town, modeled out for 7 years, and presumably it rolls forward every year. But out of that discussion came the question of, as they say, the trees don't grow to the sky. At some point, all this incredible building and economic activity on Nantucket's probably going to slow down, and I think a prudent organization and a prudent committee, and I applaud Brian and Julia and Libby and the administration for being proactive to try to come up with and look at indicators that might give us an early warning on the fall off in the economy. And given, I think I've got the numbers right, but 17 or 18% of our revenue comes from our non-tax base, so things like room tax and meals tax and things that may be more sensitive to the economic conditions on the island. If we have a fall off on that, it has a dramatic impact, and it's going to require us to come forward with some plans. So a prudent and forward-thinking organization looks to those kinds of situations and begins to think about what you might do in the event that we incur those economic conditions. And in order to do that, having some leading indicators seem to make a lot of sense. And so with that, I will stop and turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I know some of you probably do know Julia, but for anyone who doesn't, we brought Julia on board in April of 2016 as the financial analyst with the goal of creating, not only for the general fund, but for the enterprise funds and for all of those funds, the rolling 7-year forecasts. Julia has spent the majority of her time right now focusing on the general fund and has gotten it very, very far advanced. We're really down to the review process before we present to the town manager and then move forward with it. And out of that, as the chairman said, we have had discussions about what types of local receipts, since they are a very large part of our budget, can we look at as well as what other local or national indicators could we be looking at to try to give us some advance warning, at least a little bit, so that we're more proactive than reactive. I'm going to give you a high-level view, and then I'm going to let Julia kind of take you through the ones that we've got, what the graphs show, and why we think these are important. We basically have put together 3 pages for you. The first page shows two of the most important ones we think, being building permits and rooms tax, and we've kind of graphed them against real estate sales. On the lower right-hand corner, we give you the estimated local receipts by source. You can see that rooms tax, motor vehicle excise, and building permits comprise the 3 largest portions of the local estimated receipts that we budget annually, outside of property tax. So the second page in this 3-page document shows some of the national indicators that we've chosen. And again, like I said, Julia will go into more detail about what these represent and why we think they're important. And then the last page really is kind of where I think a lot of our time is going to be focused in the future. In the upper portion of that, it has the local estimated receipts. We have some other local indicators, being real estate sales, freight revenue, landing fees, and steamship authority passengers. But we also have up there the 4 biggest, being building permits, rooms tax, meals tax, and motor vehicle excise tax. And what we've done with these is we have tried to create a stoplight system so that when we review these, if they're within certain parameters, it gives us a green light, which means that they're still indicating that things are moving in a positive direction. Yellow would mean that we have to start to have some caution or look to see why there's some changes. And a red light would give us an indication that there may be something critical that we need to look at. And I'll give you an example. If you look at motor vehicle excise tax, it has a red light next to it. Many times, because of the timing of collections of motor vehicle excise tax, it could come in depending when the first motor vehicle excise commitment is, which is the largest one. It may cross quarters where before the bulk of that money is received, so one quarter may look like it's well below the parameters, but in reality, the majority of the money may be received after that quarter into the next quarter. So that's when we see the red light before we get I run down to Libby's office and say we have a problem. We really do a deep dive analysis into it. And this is something that obviously we'll be going over with town administration on a quarterly basis and working on. So I'll let Julia really take you through the nuts and bolts of these and how we came to these, and she'll be more than happy to answer any other questions.
As David said, he got a more thorough presentation on all of these indicators, all of the analysis that went behind. If you go back to the first page, basically, we looked at internal data and saw what's readily available. Obviously, our internal data is readily available. In the external data, when we looked at transportation, real estate, construction, we certainly looked to what's available, what's timely, and what's accurate. So real estate sales was a big winner there because we get that data very quickly. It just so happens that it tracks pretty much hand in hand with building permits. And, that's helpful in a way, in a sense that if we look at both, you'll see that going back to FY01, they basically track each other. So you see, if one falls apart, we're probably going to be looking at the other saying, are the building permits going to fall like real estate? So we'll be monitoring those pretty much on a monthly basis. But effectively, we know that, like Brian said, a lot of these local receipts are sensitive to the economy. What we're a little bit less, when I looked at rooms tax, a little bit less clear what happened, in the sense that they were pretty much stagnant between $1 million and $1.5 million for many years until they just took off in FY10, and you can sense that that's really not the capacity from discussing with visitor services, with lodging associations. It's not the capacity of rooms that's really changed. It's really the price per night that's gone from, an average of $250 to about, I think it's roughly $750 we're looking at. We could go back and figure out exactly how many rooms, how many nights were available. That's something we might do in the future. At this point, it's not. There's a lot of data out there that was not necessarily looked at. When we talked about sewer, we talked about water because it was not necessarily available or scrubbed. but that's something we can do in the future. But for now, this is basically a summary of what's most pertinent to us. These are the things we're going to be looking at. Obviously, we have the important ones like we talked about, but if you skip to page 2, we also are going to be looking at steamship, like Brian said, and other indicators from the airport. The national indicators obviously are there. We want to keep them in mind for an early sign of any sort of downturn that's going to happen. We know that on the island, and I've seen this from putting some of these indicators over real estate sales or building permits, that we obviously have a lag here. The economy does well for a while after it's not doing well on the mainland, or there are some clear signs on the mainland, let's say for the financial crisis of 08, 07, 08. We didn't feel it until well into 08. So the idea is if we can look at these national indicators, these leading indicators, not just national indicators, it will help us. I picked some that you might think are a little bit obscure, but there is reasoning behind all of this. I found a good source of studies for leading indicators, and it's called the Conference Board. You're welcome to go on. It's conferenceboard.org. It's a very, very broadly known source of economic data. They are a nonprofit, and they basically are a research firm. So they built their own leading indicators. Obviously, their leading indicators are proprietary. You'd have to pay a lot of money to get this info, but the study behind all of their work is public, all of the studies, and they came up with the most useful predictors of a downturn in the U.S. business cycle. And one of the most useful, they're basically interest rate spreads are very, very useful. The last time that I met with Libby and David, with Brian, we talked about the swap spreads. The swap spreads are overly complicated to understand for most folks, but by digging into them a little bit more, I realized that actually in today's environment where we have zero interest rates and even negative interest rates in some cases, they're not as valid because swaps are priced off of interest rates, and actually the market's really sort of thinking, we don't know how to look at these anymore. They don't act the way they used to. So I opted for an interest rate spread that's much more commonly understood. It's actually usually called the TED spread, but it is the spread between the LIBOR 3-month and the T-bill 3-month. So we all know that a Treasury bill is riskless. The LIBOR is another market for bank-to-bank borrowing. If they want to, leave some money overnight, but they don't want to be subject to the U.S. regulatory system, and they don't want to be putting it into the U.S. necessarily. They might want to put it in LIBOR, which is basically a little bit more interest rate. They'll get a little bit more interest, but there's credit risk. There's counterparty risk. So it will always be higher than the T-bill for the same maturity. And so by looking at the difference between the two, you can understand how the market is looking at global banking risk. And if you look at the bottom chart, you'll see obviously 07, 08, there was a huge spike. And there are spikes. If you go a little, obviously there's a very abnormal situation. If you go back to January of 90, and you look at 91, there's a nice spike there. Russian bond crisis, where they defaulted. 98, 99, 2000, you'll see that those little spikes are the SNL crisis. And so, we've set a threshold. If it goes above, on our little dashboard, the light goes yellow. If it goes above 0.5%, it goes above 0.75, we're probably now into the red. You might call it 1%, but we're now into the red, and we're really watching this. Senior loan officer survey is basically, the top chart is basically a survey of the loan officers done by the Federal Reserve. And it brings back a whole host of questions. But the most pertinent question, the most useful one, is give us the percentage, so it's basically the percentage of loan officers that are reporting tighter loan standards for firms, large and medium firms. And if they're tightening standards, it's because they're getting worried about getting paid, obviously. And that's another indicator of the credit market, if you'd like. But it's really usually where it starts. The early indicators are in the credit market, so that's what we're looking at. We added a couple of other ones that are also interesting in terms of growth. New unemployment claims, initial claims. It's a weekly number, and it's pretty easily accessible. And the S&P 500. The S&P is just, everybody's focused a little bit on that stuff, and it's probably good just to keep an eye on it, and it really is tied to Wall Street bonuses. So we know we are tied to Wall Street bonuses to some degree. So those are the indicators that we're looking at in terms of national indicators. The dashboard is a work in progress document. It's something we put together, but obviously it is something that's, that we would like to present this on a quarterly basis, is my understanding. And it's going to be for you, for town administration, so we need people to understand it and to be able to read it well. So if you have any suggestions or any comments, obviously now or tomorrow, you're welcome to give your input. If you have any questions, obviously, feel free.
I was just curious about what are the triggers in terms of your, red and green lights? What makes one of the indicators stay green, or what would make it turn red? Is it a decline? Is it just if it's housing starts, there's some number, and if it goes down 5%, that's a red?
It's
Just
customizable.
have you set them?
Yeah, it's customizable, right? So right now, the way they're set with the local receipts, you could say if they start going down, they're going up like a hockey stick. So we'd start to get worried if really they're just sort of decreasing in growth. We're not worried, So my thresholds are a little higher than 0%, in terms of growth. Right now, I think they're at 5%. If they're not growing more than 5% a year, we're not on track, that we've on the same track we've been effectively, and we're worried a little bit about what's going on.
Sorry, when you say same track we've been at, when does that stretch back to? What?
Well, if you go back to the first page and you look at FY10 for building permits and rooms tax.
Right,
You
okay.
will see that that's the bottom. And then FY11, you'll see rooms tax, and it just takes a launch. And
Yep.
I could chart, meals tax isn't quite as variable because we have a capacity and in terms of restaurants, there's a certain number of restaurants. The prices of the meals change a little bit, but not to the same extent as they do with the hotel rooms, you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So you're basing this all this growth off of the last bottom.
yeah.
Okay.
Because, even though your budget number might not be as aggressive as what's going on, you still want to see it coming if it does slow down.
Right.
If the growth is slowing, so that's why the thresholds are a little bit higher.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Just jump in.
I think you said it perfectly when you said, how do you even read these indicators anymore? With zero interest rates and currency wars, and it's almost like a stock market for what, good news is bad news. And I think the best indicators that you pointed out when it comes to Nantucket is almost the indicators from off island, because we do seem to lead and then lag. And, the housing boom died 2 years before it died here, off island. And as far as credit's still tough to get, so I'm not sure if that went down anymore. The loans aren't even loans anymore. I have loans, they're more like bridge loans. There's so much collateral, it's ridiculous. So, yeah, I think off-island indicators would probably forecast a better future than ours didn't show up until at least, what they've done in the past anyhow.
I think that the problem with the off-island indicators in general is that, we'll call them, they show blips. The last time we met, we were a little more worried than we are today. That was a month ago. So I think that, things are a little bit, I think people are antsy right now in general. And so every little bit of bad news, you don't want to take it too much for face value. You just sort of have to, yellow light for a while and then see if it gets really bad.
Okay.
I think it's important that we really hear, as we move through this process, that we use all of them together.
Yeah.
Because some of ours will lag as well. I mean, obviously, building permits may lag because of the timing of when they're actually become active and everything in terms of stuff. So I think that or rooms tax may lag a little bit too, because you may see the downturn over there, but people are still coming here for a period of time, maybe because they've already had it planned and they're not going to stop. They're not coming. So I think it's important to recognize that that lag and use everything all together rather than becoming solely dependent on just looking at the national indicators and what's happening off island, because I think in order for us to make sure that we don't get caught in something we weren't prepared for, we need to be making sure that we're paying attention to everything, which is what we're working towards, I think. But I do agree that, Massachusetts typically, if you look at them, has always experienced a lag. They've been we've been fortunate, I guess you could say, to go into it a little bit later than most places. But that also means that we come out of it a little bit later than everybody else as well.
Do you have any banks that participate giving you mortgage information, like how many loans are given out in a given year or anything like that? That seems that would be.
So David had mentioned this, and locally, it's a little bit difficult to get this information.
Okay.
We don't have any publicly traded local banks, unfortunately.
And I made an inquiry with the management at Cape Cod 5, and they track it, but it's proprietary, and they're not.
Yeah, they're not
They're not going to help us.
How proprietary is it? I mean, I just wonder that. I mean, it would just be interesting from real estate perspective to bounce that against
Yeah.
sales, because then you might have an idea for how much of your market is leveraged and then prone to.
I have a number of indicators I would love to get my hands on locally, and
One indicator and I'm sure we talked about, but sitting here pops to mind, is because we're a self-contained entity, is sales tax receipts a good indicator?
so you're talking at the state level?
No, for Nantucket. I'm sure that they cut the data by sales tax for this,
So they're
for this
actually,
county or,
I know that Mass Tourism tracks, I have this data, they track basically credit card receipts. It's a little bit, you can say it's cut from the same data, but they're so lagged, in when they report it. So I'll look into it. I anticipate it will be very, very lagged.
well, this is great. I think the second part to all of this is only as good as what you do with it when you get to yellow or red.
Right.
And I'm hoping that you all will, along with Libby and the team, at least have a core set of, an outline, if you will, or a core set of actions. It may not be specific, we need to stop doing this program and blah, 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 but that there's something that gets triggered, that we don't look at this and just walk off the edge of the cliff as we're looking at the data, that there's something that, concrete,
I
happens
mean,
and is an
internally,
outcome.
we're looking at it monthly.
Right.
Because we're building basically the quarterly reports on a monthly basis. So we're looking at it to see for fluctuations, declines, trying to figure out, is it a timing difference between when receipts are come in, or is it something we really need to worry about? It's something that we certainly do as part of the quarterly presentation, not only to the town manager, but to the Board of Selectmen. But obviously, in the event, if in one quarter, 2 quarters fell off the map, then we probably would be having discussions, I shouldn't say probably, we certainly would be having discussions with town administration earlier, very early, to start saying, we really need to start paying attention to this, because we've had a couple consecutive quarters where they haven't met what we think the expectations are, to start the planning for that, to see if we need to do anything.
I would hope that you actually would have some triggers that are a little bit, so we don't look at 2 quarters of bad results and then spend another quarter or 2 quarters trying to figure out what we're going to do, but that there's some, hypothetically, if we run 2 quarters in the red of, half of our indicators, it triggers some group of people that have to, come forward with something along that line.
My expectation would be that after the first quarter, we would start formulating what would happen if we saw this continuing. Okay, so, if it was in the yellow in 1 quarter, we would start internally saying, okay, this is one of the indicators that we're looking at, it's critical to us, it's dropping off, why is it dropping off? And if it continues like this, what is our plan to rectify that and recover however we would need to, if it being a revenue source?
Did I hear you say that there's a lag between, when you talk about the national or even regional, as opposed to us, there's a lag between when you see certain things out there and when certain things here occur?
Sure. I mean, if you look at historically, you look at the last major downturn that we had, the state of Massachusetts actually started feeling it I don't know, I don't remember exactly how long after, John, but we didn't start feeling it immediately in 2008. We, being in the municipal world, I think it didn't start impacting the state and their receipts until 2009. So we had a lag from when everybody said we started to go into the recession and when we started to feel it. So what we're trying to do is get these indicators that give us an idea of when this is really happening so that we are more prepared for it than just waiting and being in a reactive scenario.
Right. See, some of the local indicators they may be leading indicators, but they're still, you're going to react to them, as opposed to, but if there is a lag, if you can substantiate a lag between certain indicators
Right.
on the mainland and what happens here, that's the key in my mind, is to get an early warning and say, all right, because, if you look at our budget process is quite a ways in advance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we really need, as far in advance, in an ideal world, it would be nice to have a really advanced feeling about, hey, things are going to start getting worse, and so we can reflect it.
Right,
in our
and
budget.
this is this conversation and these tools really are important when you look at the forecast, because what we've done is we've built in the flexibility to say, okay, if these start to trend a little bit downward now, but we can take the forecast and we can plug those declines in and see what it'll do, so that we can start that planning process immediately for the next budget cycle, or even the next 2 budget cycles, whatever we look at. So the good thing about marrying this all together is the fact that we can take the data that we're looking at today and plug it into the forecast and say, what will this look like if this trend continues?
Yeah.
So, and I agree, we will not nail this spot on, but we'll be in a much more proactive scenario than a reactive scenario.
It'll sensitize you, and you'll be able to start to look
Yeah.
at things as you get closer and so forth,
Any other questions?
Nope.
So my thanks, and also applaud you for this is quality work. So great job, Julia, great job, Brian. So, and hopefully, as a committee, we'll be getting this information, so it'll be good. Thank you.
You all?
Okay, good.
Next item on our agenda,
Is the,
rotate is review of the special town meeting timeline. You all, I think, got a copy of it. We don't have to spend any time going over it. I think we're scheduled for a public hearing on the 13th of September for all of you that are out there, but I think we're going to want to have, and we'll take this up in a few minutes, but we're going to probably want to have internal discussion before the public meeting on these articles. So anyway, that's and Libby, you don't see any change in the
There might be
schedule.
some tweaks here and there. One thing that's not on here yet is the date of the election, if we're going to be having ballot questions.
Gotcha.
So I haven't entirely worked that in yet, but I will.
Okay. But that wouldn't impact, it's not going to impact our
Wouldn't
schedule.
impact
Yeah. Okay. Any questions on the schedule?
I won't be here on the 11th, I'm closing August 11th.
August 11th. So I don't think that's okay. We don't have any.
Oh, we have.
It's just a compilation of the.
Oh, it's just okay.
Okay. So they're going to put the stuff together. So I guess the administration probably has some warrant articles coming forward. So.
Yeah, I don't, maybe I didn't read it right. It wasn't too clear when we'd get our hands on the information.
It looks like the adoption of the warrant on the selectmen's meeting on the 17th, which is 2 weeks from yesterday.
Okay.
And we've got the citizens' articles, which we're going to have a quick, we're going to have a discussion about this afternoon to sort of get that going. And then we have to figure out when we want to have a meeting so that we can, and how much we want to dig into some of these
Yeah,
things.
I have you on the schedule as on the 18th. One forwarded to FinCom needs to review.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Yep.
So
If that were.
yep.
now, here's the question I have. If if the Board of Selectmen adopt the warrant on August 17th, and we're going to meet on the 18th, if the only time we're going to see that information is on the morning of the 18th, for instance, which would be the earliest, that doesn't give us a lot of time to deal with it if we're going to meet on the 18th. That's all.
We can schedule, and it would be my intent, again, depending on what our conversation looks like a little later in this meeting, we may want to meet again so that,
Yeah.
other than just the 18th, and that's a prerogative of the committee. So,
It really depends on the articles themselves and what's involved. If they're pretty simple and straightforward, that's not an issue, but if there's a lot of
well, while we're on it, so
controversy.
what do you anticipate? Sewers in Nantucket?
Right now, I have approximately 10 town articles. Sewers in Nantucket, which is at least 2 articles, and appropriation and sewer district amendments. We have an authorization to extend the lease for Academy Hill, and that relates to refinancing for the leaseholder and SU affordable housing covenants. The extinguishment of an old right-of-way that runs through the fire station property, that might go to the manual. We're having some internal discussion about whether or not we need an article to amend the Nantucket Harbor Shimo Sewer District to add parcels on Drew Lane. The airport has an additional appropriation for FAA required runway painting, which they say they must get built with. Comment has 2 articles. The reallocation of funds from a Nantucket water project to their new admin building. And it turns out that while they've been sewered since 1973, they're not in the sewer district. The land bank has a refinancing for some outstanding bonds. We are going to need a supplemental appropriation for a Lyon landfill sale of about $700,000. And we are talking internally about whether or not we should seek an appropriation for a trailer for the fire station.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to need more than one meeting.
My guess is, we'll get warmed up on
Okay.
the first meeting, and then we'll probably want to.
Great. Thanks, Libby.
Sure.
So, anything else on the timeline?
No, I am not going to be here the last 2 weeks of August, and there's going to be some short staffing that in
Okay.
that time period. So just when we get to scheduling additional meetings, there may not be people in there.
Okay.
But maybe it'll work out like the first or second week of September. I don't think there's anything else.
Yeah, there's nothing, the first week in September may be okay.
Yeah.
Other thing that's not floating here yet, I've just emailed Leslie and Andrews. I don't know if they probably have not yet scheduled a public hearing for, there's at least one citizen zoning article. So we don't need to find a bridge.
Okay. Great. Moving on, next agenda item is a preliminary review of the citizen warrant articles for a special town meeting. Thank you. I know we have some folks here who are behind some of these articles. The purpose of doing this is a committee to, hopefully you've had a chance to look at them. We're not taking public comment, so appreciate you coming and listening. You'll have an opportunity at a future meeting. But for us to have a discussion amongst ourselves, and really the question, I guess, the first to put on the table is there information that we would like to see come forth when we get together with these folks and we hear their presentations, that we want to make sure that they come prepared to answer, so that they don't show up and it's a semi-productive.
Start asking, where's this and where's that?
Yeah. So anyway, in that regard, it's a free-form discussion. So
So do we want to cover the criteria and send it to you to think of what?
well, I'd like to have the discussion today.
Okay.
If it takes some refinement, that's fine, not a problem. But I'd like to get it. I think if we don't have a discussion now, we'll all go our merry way and have a couple of cocktails and forget about it.
All of a sudden,
So
So you want to just sort of go through them one by one and just
sure,
if there's any
sure.
comments or questions?
Yep.
And
Okay. So the first one up is,
Creation of a work group on our.
yeah, the creation of a work group on our island home. And we did have a work group on our island home. There's a citizens article to establish another work group. And I guess, one of the questions, since our island home is not going to be on the special town meeting, administration didn't put it on, have you all had a discussion about what you may be doing as an administration? And maybe it would be, I have a little bit of knowledge, but maybe it would be helpful if the committee knew
Sure.
what's going on with the consultants and.
Sure, I should have brought my list of all of those items, but there's a lot of things that we're going to need to be working on. The completion of the consultant's financial report, which has to do with identifying and forecasting the financial impact of the alternative model that we're looking at. The site needs to be cleared up. And there are things that have to happen in order to clear the site up, like some archaeological report isn't completely in yet, and then maybe additional archaeological reports. Public outreach, obviously, we need to do. Once we've identified, in a particular order, but once the site has been more defined, we're going to need plans. And those are maybe the major things, and I sort of have an internal, just staff people working on it with the architect, and the chairman of the board has been probably the most active person involved, so those are the types of things we're going to be working on. None of that could really reasonably get accomplished unless we dropped everything else before the special.
No, I think your decision to push it off is a good decision. Are you on the glide path, though, to having it done for regular annual town meeting?
That's the plan. Yeah, and we know there are certainly public concerns about what is happening, so we want to do our best to address those and improve them.
Libby, we had a group that I was aware of that was looking at this, and now we're going to have another group.
Well, the proposal is for another group, yes.
Okay, well, that's what the proposal is. Is there, I don't understand, what's the reasoning behind having, will this be a separate group?
This is a citizen initiative. It's
This is
not
a citizen
town.
initiative, it's not a town
I got you.
initiative.
Okay, thank you.
So I think what you heard was what the town is planning to do between now and
Yeah.
annual town meeting.
Gotcha. Okay, now I
So-
got a little confused there.
So the question, so we have there is a citizen's petition. We'll be making a recommendation whether we want to, support it or not. Is there anything when Fran Cartoonan comes, and I assume, Fran, you'd be representing the group, is there information that we want them to bring us to help us inform the decision,
Well, one of the things that,
inform our decision on what we do for this, our recommendation on their article?
right, one of the things that I think we need to see is very much data that concerns what other people are doing, what their costs are, their cost of building, and so forth. Either on the Cape or around the Commonwealth, comparative data, and try to get a good idea of what we're talking about and how is that going to compare with what other people are doing and what their experience has been.
And I think that's probably a question most appropriate addressed to administration because they have the resources to
Exactly.
answer the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So the question that I have for us is there something relative to the citizens petition warrant article, is there something on, when they come before us, is there information that we want them to be prepared to answer
Yep.
Okay.
when they stand in front of us?
The
You know
citizen-
the citizens, you know what the town's planning on doing.
Okay.
Libby said they're on a runway to, we'll have this information, they will be doing public outreach. So the question is there stuff that we want them to bring back to us?
Just to clarify, is the town's work group working in parallel with this new group?
The town currently does not have a work group.
Yeah, we just have staff and
That's-
professionals.
Okay.
We would certainly meet with, I mean, we've already been meeting with the public and groups.
Yep.
And we would continue to do that.
If this work group was to be created, what I would just want to know is how are they going to communicate with their counterparts in the town, and then whatever they find, give them that information. I mean, how does this work? I mean, you can have a work group, but if you don't effectively share the information or communicate this stuff, so that's what I'd like to know is how are they going to operate? You know, did they plan? I mean, I see on the warrant article they have people from the town kind of participating, but is that going to be well received? Do they need the help?
And I think more fundamentally, what's the purpose of the work group? I mean,
Yeah.
what particular issues and do they want to explore? And what does the proposer of this particular article believe that this work group is going to uncover or examine that hasn't been uncovered and examined by the previous Island Home Work Group and town administration?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
why do they want to put this group together, and what's it going to do?
Yeah, obviously, they've got to have a reason for wanting another work group, and we need to see what those reasons are. They need to be very succinct and specific. This
Yep.
speaks to.
So you, Joe, you mean beyond the, because that's what I'm talking about, is beyond the scope.
Work groups for the sake of work groups don't make
Yeah.
any sense at all. So,
The mission statement.
Well, just to make sure they're not going beyond the
that,
scope
I
of what the
don't
town's already
really
doing.
know
I mean,
even beyond a mission statement is tends to be very foggy and loose. I'm more interested in what are you trying to achieve? What are your goals?
okay.
Okay?
That's, yeah.
Anything else?
Maybe unrelated, but what have we achieved with the $1 million we already appropriated for a set of plans? Did that go anywhere? Is that going to be?
Well, we're using it for the financial report,
Okay.
which is needed in order to do the plans.
All right.
And
So we haven't already spent a bunch of plans we're not going to use?
No,
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 no.
no.
Oh, great.
no.
There's still money there, folks. Great. Fran, that's the kind of stuff that when you come back are the kinds of questions we're going to have. We'd appreciate you all thinking about it and being responsive to that. It'll help us inform the recommendations that we would make. Great, thank you. Next up, so many pages of signatures here. Article B is a zoning one. That's not going to be, we will presumably, unless there's some real driving interest, take the recommendation of the planning board. So, is there any interest in any of the zoning articles? Okay,
I mean, there's interest, but it's private, so,
so that's,
yeah.
you're welcome to go to the planning meeting and
Yeah.
bug them about it. So, going on to the next part, D, that's the zoning
C looks-
overview.
Article C.
C looks like adding some parcels into a sewer district, is that?
And I would assume that that's a function of, and also the selectmen having to run through their criteria. So typically, we would ask the question, does it meet the criteria? So, the next article is a rezoning. Is it a rezoning on, yes, in an overlay district on Hawthorne Lane? You might need to recuse yourself on this one. Not today, but when it comes time.
Okay.
I'm not telling you you have to, but
The only connection is that he's related, but I
Yeah.
can, yeah, if that's necessary, sure.
Yeah, David, on the zoning things, it always, usually when we have them and you study them, the question I always have is, what are they trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
And invariably, that isn't put in there, so that they certainly, and then we get into some of it gets to be pretty interesting because it depends on how you look at it, but I think that I would like to know ahead of time. In other words, not, and it needs to be somehow it needs to be articulated, article by article on the zoning.
Right.
Is, what are you trying, why are you doing this? It's, and they say, well, it's, because I think we need to understand that. Because we get into it eventually anyway. It would be nice to get that in advance. Could save a
Well,
little
that's
time.
probably a discussion with the planning department or planning board, so I will reach out to them. Okay.
Usually we get that when
Well, it's typically been the case that we accept the recommendation of the planning board and move forward, but, and not spend a lot of time on it, but I know there's some of them have come up and we have that.
well, some of them might have some economic impact, so.
Okay. The next one I have, I think, is Catherine's petition, which is to see if the town will borrow appropriated transfer of $400,000 from the reserve fund for such purposes, which is to, I'm having trouble getting my computer to show the whole of that article, but anyway, and I presume that it's for the purposes of funeral home through a not-for-profit entity. So, issues that we want to see addressed, see acquisition or transfer for both money and the acquisition of property.
So we're being asked to approve just if I'm reading this right, to give them the land and then also give them $400,000? Or
No, I think
$400,000 for the land?
to purchase the land.
To purchase the land, and I guess I'd want to know if that's already been negotiated, that price.
No, I think the purpose of the appropriation is to fund the acquisition costs of the land.
Land.
This land does not have clear title,
Okay,
so,
Taking it by eminent domain, right?
okay.
well, that's.
I thought doesn't the town own doesn't the town own this parcel already?
It's not clear title. It is listed as town manager, yes, but my understanding from Andrew is that the title issues. So the idea would be take it by eminent domain, but that means you have to set aside things on damage rules and have to develop survey plans, and there are a number of costs associated with taking.
Yep.
That's about, we estimated cost for that.
Okay, I'd just like to see a breakdown of those costs and what exactly is wrong with the title. It'd be nice to know just from a. And then I guess the plan for the funeral home itself and the cost for the build out and any other foreseeable monies they're going to be asking for. If this is the first step in getting the funeral home put together, what's the timeline for the whole project and how much money do they see spending in completion? I mean, that's what we're talking about here is building a funeral home, right? So,
Well, the question that I'm going to want to know is if the town is going to pony up, or if they want $400,000 from the town, who owns the funeral home going forward? Who's going to own the land? Who's going to own the funeral home? Because if I'm a business and you ask me to invest $400,000, I'm going to want a piece of the action. So if I were a town and you're asking me to invest, I'd want to know what's in it for me.
yeah, for me, it's just a little bit beyond more than we need a funeral home. That much is obvious. I think it's the same thing we went through with the fire station. We all know we're going to need a fire station, but let's have a little bit more detailed process about what this money's being used for, what's wrong with land, who's going to own it, and then going forward, how's it going to operate and where are the rest of the funds coming from, and how long is it going to take?
Yeah, there needs to be a business plan,
Yes.
and I think that's what you're looking
Yeah,
for.
that's
A
that's
detailed
exactly.
business plan, and I think that's what you need to see before you authorize spending any money. I mean, without a detailed business plan, you're just spending money because we want to feel good about it, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to know the plan.
Yeah, okay. Cliff, anything?
Simply put, yeah.
Okay, great. Catherine?
Should I email that to you?
We would love to see it ahead of time, certainly be prepared to have a discussion when we get together. Okay,
Great.
great.
Thank you.
What's the next one up? As I scroll through these signature pages. Article F. Mattocket Warren's Landing. So this is a, article is, I understand it, to delay a decision on sewering Mattocket until the annual town meeting and to put together a work group. And they've laid out who the representatives are that they would like to see on the work group. And so I think that encapsulates what it is that they're seeking for the purposes of when they come and visit with us, what would the committee like to see them be prepared to address?
I think to review those issues that they feel have not been addressed in the whole sewer planning process to date, and whether there's new information that they feel that they can uncover or they have uncovered or believe is out there that would change the town's decision to, well, the town hasn't decided, but,
Yeah. Well,
change the plans to go in
the
sewer.
the voters have to
Mattocket sewer
decide.
thing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think particularly with emphasis on new information, if that be the case, if there's not new information, then I guess, why are we going through this, But, yeah.
Okay. Cliff?
Yeah, that just, again, a mission statement of what they're trying to achieve, and, I mean, it's obvious, but sometimes people get up here and they start to speak, and you figure out what it is they want until halfway through.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if this is germane or not, but as it happens, Tobias Glidden, had a chat with Tobias a couple of weeks ago. He was on his,
Campaign stuff.
and he wanted to talk to me about, what I believed about the Mattocket sewer project, and we had a nice chat conversation about it, but he seems to be espousing, the idea of why are we spending whatever the number is, this much millions of dollars, why don't we just use that money and buy everybody a tight tank, and, it would be a lot less money, and Tobias, candidly, you were a selectman. I mean, wasn't all this reviewed and analyzed before we got to this point? So you were there before I was.
So new
I
information.
Again, I guess I'm just telling
Okay.
an anecdote. It may or may not be relevant to this.
Yeah. Henry, anything that's on your?
Just how it fits into the rest. How does Mattocket fit in to the rest? I mean, do we even have? Say we appropriated the money. Do we even have the ability to appropriate that much money?
Do we have the ability?
I mean, if we said let's, no, we don't want to do this now, and we're going to vote on it, or yes, we're going to do it in an annual town meeting. Do we? How does that affect our budgetary process? How does that affect our debt? But the work group sounds like something that should be done.
Okay. Lydia, along with
Nothing
this,
to
I would request that your, whatever staff are appropriate, to, and I'm prepared to provide something written on what I think that they need to review with us. I don't know that we need to have consultants and all of that, but certainly, you've got staff that are familiar with this, and there's certainly a bunch of questions that are out there, part of which I think this is trying to get at. So we'll provide that. So, Bill, that's what we're looking for. So
Yeah, we have 30 to 40 exactly what the gentleman said. New points or points that have yet to be answered, and that's
Great.
why we're asking for delay, not stop.
Okay, great.
Good. But, in the quality of those, you know, so often we hear things like, well, it's gonna be cheaper, you know. Well, Steve made a big deal out of it the other day, well, what does cheaper mean, you know? In other words, what's the payback gonna be, you know what I mean, type of thing. So that's the quality of that type of thing is gonna be very important to me anyways, because so often we get into what I call soft language that you can't get your arms around. And so if there are reasons for delay, then they need to be very hard, understandable reasons that we can take to the
Our
bank.
questions are not soft questions.
Yeah,
We got you.
yeah,
That's why we did.
very specific
Okay.
things.
Good.
Yeah.
Great, thanks very much.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
You'll know when we're off. So, anything else on warrant articles? The next one's a zoning one, I think we'll just pass over. I think, John, we know your position on that stuff, so, anyway.
Oh, I don't know.
So the final item, aside from setting our next meeting, I wanted to have the start of a discussion about how we want this year's budget review and article review process to move forward. And I think, we certainly can, it's fresh in our minds, we can certainly use the fire station as an example. Libby, I pulled off the landfill stuff from the packet, which has got money in it. And I think that one of the things that we should we should talk about as a committee is, how early and how involved do we want to be as a FinCom in looking at these warrant articles? I mean, it's normally been our practice that we have people come, make a presentation, we get the information a couple of days ahead of time. We have a discussion. Sometimes it's a good discussion, sometimes it's, not all that productive. Some stuff, an awful lot of the stuff that we deal with, we really don't have the power to change. Insurance costs are insurance costs. We can ask why they're going up. We'll get the same answer this year that we got last year and the year before. So, well, I think it's important for us to understand that. Are we, should we be putting our emphasis on a different syllable as we go forward, to borrow a phrase, and try to engage in some of these things earlier, or to drill down deeper, and which to some extent I'm trying to facilitate by having us talk about the town meeting articles now, asking people to come back with very specific information so that we're not spinning our wheels, and that both parties feel it's a productive process.
I'd like to see us, like you just said, resolve the ones we can resolve immediately, and it seems like I'd love to avoid this town meeting floor discussions we have. It just seems brutal that we go all the way to town meeting, we're having a meeting the night before, sometimes on a citizen's article. I'd just like to get the citizens' articles, I think, as quick as we can, so maybe people can deliberate, and we can avoid the last-minute meetings on some of these articles.
Well, I would, and as far as that goes, I would follow prior chairman's lead, and basically say if we don't have Wednesday for annual town meeting would be a cutoff. I mean, I personally don't want to see us making anything more than minor technical changes on the day of town meeting. And I think is that what you're talking about?
Sometimes it's sometimes, even though it's a citizen's article, sometimes it's sewer, and it seems like we get misleading information, and it just bounces back and forth and goes all the way up to town meeting.
So what you would like to see is information earlier that we can nail down.
Yeah, maybe vote on earlier so the citizen knows which direction we're going. Because when I first got here, we probably saw the information in November, December, and then we waited,
Okay.
and then we voted. It seems almost like some of the stuff that's more obvious we should get out of the way. So if there's more deliberation, we can be done with it sooner than later.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm probably being very nebulous, and so part of it is that I'm searching to see what not the consensus, but what people's ideas are and how we,
Yeah.
we can get at things so we don't run up to the kind of situation to some extent we had with the fire department, which,
Yeah. I think, David, the key to me is sometimes there's been a lot of discussion, at least with the Board of Selectmen and other people, on certain items that eventually get to us. And the point is, but we don't see that information until it eventually gets to us. And I think if you were to say to me, what things do you want to see on an ongoing basis? And I would answer it this way, and that is anything, whether we're going to have to deliberate either on a budget basis or just a plain, what we had in the last meeting, on any type of a interface that we're going to have on a given item, we ought to be looking at a lot of preliminary data long before we get there so that we don't all of a sudden walk into something. And I think what bothers me all the time, and I know I'm not always, I don't always have a good demeanor about it, because you get upset about things when you get surprised. And that's no way, you don't want to make a decision when you're surprised. You want to be in there early. And so I think the issue here is, what do you want to see? I want to see anything that we're going to eventually have to look at anyway.
well, I would temper that, because I don't think you want every piece of budget information crossing your
Didn't say
desk.
that. Yeah, all right, and that's a good point, David. It's nothing, we're not talking about every 10-cent item.
Yeah.
We're talking about the big items.
Yeah, I mean, I think, go ahead.
No, I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at either, David, so, but it strikes me that one of the things that we can do better as a committee is, at the beginning of the process, as the warrant is either complete or, and I'm talking about the annual meeting,
sure.
right? Have a meeting where we talk about which issues are really contentious or need extra debate, and which ones are, for lack of, not that they're all not important, but some of them are perfunctory. I mean, we just swept all the real estate, issues. We don't really have much input on those unless they happen to be a contentious issue. We're not really going to have to do anything other than sort of agree with the planning board. Seems to me if we take that approach, you could probably divide the list of articles into, ones that really require time and are going to be contentious and or require a lot of work, and ones that we have to review, but, are kind of standard, and you approve them and move on, and probably a whole bunch that
Right.
kind of don't need a lot of time.
I think in this light, though, it's also important for the other arms of the town administration and Board of Selectmen to be giving us their priorities, so we can kind of understand what everyone else is thinking. I mean, this is, in a lot of ways, kind of like a two-way mirror. We don't want to be surprised, and you don't want to micromanage anybody, but at the same time, by knowing your priorities on a more long-term basis, it can help us understand where you're coming from. And I just think that kind of facilitates the cooperation that allows us to work more efficiently and with better knowledge. So that's just what I'd like to understand. And
So let me, thank you. Let me turn it to Brian and Libby. I mean, we don't want you guys do a tremendous amount of work, so we're not trying to drive more work. I think there is a desire to, on some of this stuff, to know more sooner, so that the decisions that are made are presumably better, whatever better is, decisions. Lord knows the selectmen themselves are overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have to do, and so don't necessarily spend the amount of time that they might like to spend on certain issues. So to some extent, we can help them or supplement them. Do you all have any, and Brian, you and I have talked about, as we all know, when was the last time anybody called Article 8 for a discussion?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but it does happen.
Once in a while. Article 8 being all our budget stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the budget that, a lot of it is fixed. So, labor is all fixed. I mean, it is what it is. Town's got all these agreements. We have other things like insurances. you know, the real question for me is how much time do we really have to spend on those kinds of things, and how much should we just say to the administration, you know, we would like to look at this more on an exception basis. So if we've got departments that are asking for new employees, or we have an abnormally high, you know, set of capital requests that, you know, may or may not have made it through the, you know, the Capcom, and focus on what I would call exceptions rather than, you know, going through the exercise of doing things that ultimately we're going to, maybe it makes us feel good that we sort of know what's going on, but we don't. Not sure how much value we've added to that process. And instead, program that time elsewhere where we actually can make a difference to the point that Joe was making. I mean, is that? I know this is a little soft, and that part of it is that I'm trying to figure out, you know, how we might make some adjustments without screwing you all up. And
Well, we spent a lot of time putting together budget packets for you. So to the extent that we wouldn't have to do as much of that, that would make us very happy. But I know that some of you really like to look at that stuff. So maybe we could have one packet, I'll look at it, and tell us what you're going to talk about. We tend to have the big 5 or 6 departments come in, always, and
Right.
review their budgets. And sometimes there's some newer stuff, and sometimes there's not, but they come in anyway. So, I mean, do whatever you want us to do in terms of who you want to see. I hope you don't want to see everybody.
I think our conversation's going in the other direction. I'd like to see fewer.
That would be fine. Maybe one of the things to look at is as you know, we do, sort of talking around here, but we have expense increase requests that are really above and beyond. It's generally a certain dollar amount, but it's new vehicles for the departments that don't have those in their operating budgets, new positions, things like that. Maybe those departments come in, or we spend some time explaining those a little bit, depending on what it is. If it's something, you know, a little bit out of the ordinary, like a new program or a new initiative or something like that. As far as the warrant articles go, in the capital items, sometimes things happen. And last year, I've been trying to think of an example when you're saying we get something very late, because we are the ones who are here hearing you constantly saying we don't want things late. So we try to do our best to get things early. Something that came up last year was the $1 million, for example, for the Affordable Housing Trust, which came up at the very end of the entire budget process. It never went through the capital program committee. It didn't really go through the FinCom too much, if at all, in a very formal way. But that was beyond our control, and that came up
That came up at the last
through
minute.
the board at the last minute. So we can't really help that stuff, except to remind the board and others, please do not wait until the last minute. We are coming up to the time when we're going to be asking all the departments to provide updates to the capital plan, and their budgetary items, that's a little bit later in the fall, but capital's coming up, and we try to review those things with the Board of Selectmen in September, and then the capital program committee in October through November into December, and then you all in December sometime. So I don't think there's going to be anything new in a high dollar amount that you haven't heard of before, but sometimes something happens and it comes up. We've been lecturing the department heads, do not submit anything that's not already in the plan without a really good reason, like it's suddenly come up from a mandate or whatever, and obviously there's big issues that are floating around about that. So we hear you, and we want to try to get you things early, because we don't want to be as much of a pain for you as for us as it is for you to do doing all the stuff at the last minute, because we have deadlines that have to get dealt with, and
Right.
we're the ones getting things to the paper and in warrants and like that. So we would like to work toward that goal, but bigger picture things.
Well, David, you had that from the selectmen's meeting last night, on the landfill.
Right.
Now, if I'm on the stick and I'm not always on the stick. I will go to the website and I will look at what was at the Board of Selectmen's meeting, and I will stroll through the whole thing, the packet, and that. I don't always have the time, or sometimes I just miss it because every events are so busy. Something like that would be something that if we were automatically included on the mailing list of that.
Well, you
Okay.
can, I think there's a.
Because that's a big item in my
You
mind.
can sign up to get the agenda. That's you gotta do that from your computer. We can't do that for you. But as you're saying that about the landfill, we should try to remember if it's something coming up on a warrant, town meeting warrant, we should try to get it to you. So I will send you the information that was in the packet on the landfill,
Yep,
line landfill stuff.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's the
but-
kind of thought, that's the thought process I'm having. In other words, your judgment would be better than most people's, and so therefore, what do you think are the big items as the information unfolds over a period of time?
Yeah, okay.
And,
But,
and,
yeah.
and I know that it's there. If we want to go to the website, we can pull it out. But I must admit, a lot, because I forget to do that, or I don't have time, or one thing or another. But if it was sent to me, I'd read it, for sure.
And let me, this is pertinent in sort of to give you an idea of how it flows through, and, the other members of the committee wouldn't have heard this, but Roberta was at a neighborhood association meeting, and he was talking about, it was in Nantucket, he was talking about sewers in Nantucket. And the question came up about speeding up the mining of the landfill. And he made a comment that it would cost $15 million. Now, so so here I'm sitting here listening and made no comment to him about that, but it was very clear. I mean, we spend $500,000 to mine the landfill every year. If you speed it up,
A little more than that.
yeah, maybe you spend more money, and maybe on a present dollar basis, it's a little bit more expensive, but nevertheless, you're going to still spend that money over the life of mining the landfill. So the question was, where did 15 million come from? Well, this memo delves into what happens if you speed up, from George Aronson,
Yeah.
speed up the mining of the landfill. It triggers the closing of all of these other cells. And, there's some financial ramifications associated with all of that. And,
More than $1.50.
so it's somehow, to me, that, this is gonna come our way at some point.
Yeah.
And I think, this is a good illustration of somehow trying to figure out, not that we have to do deep dives into this every time but that we generally have some awareness that this is what's coming forward, and that may collectively allow us to, put our heads together on
Sure.
it, or to, go to, and George does a great job on his analysis, but, go and say, do we have, do we know what it cost them, in present value dollars, or, do we have enough data to make a good decision about it? So,
Yeah.
those are the kinds of things that I think we'd all like to see, so we have more impact earlier in the process. And it's
Okay.
not just give it to us a week ahead of time,
Yeah.
it's being, further upstream in the process, so that, and not on everything. These are, this is gonna be it's not the biggest thing we're gonna spend money on, but it's not a small item as well, so.
Yeah.
Just the biggies, yeah.
So,
Got it.
is
No,
it
that's-
getting a little bit more in focus on?
Yeah, and that's a very good point, and we have to adjust mindsets to
Oh, that's biggie.
think that way. It sounds very easy, oh, just include us when you think something's coming up, but sometimes it's just not that straightforward. But I do hear what you're saying, so we'll try to keep that in our thinking and anticipate what types of things you might want, although we might talk to you, David, directly about a thing and say, what do you think
Yeah.
you may want? But in the meantime, in particular on this landfill cell item, I'll send you so just in a nutshell, we had a discussion last night about updated construction costs, and that has, those came from Waste Options. George is chasing down, the confirmation of those. And as a result of that, there had already been an ongoing board discussion about, instead of adding new cells, why don't we see what shipping the material off island would cost? So George has done at least 3 times now, most recently in the packet
Right.
last night, an analysis of that. And it's prohibitively, well, I think, it's prohibitively expensive to ship off, even though I think everybody would like to do that for a lot of reasons. One of the items that came up at the board meeting that wasn't in George's memo was how much would it cost to barge the material. His analysis has to do with shipping it off on the steamship authority. Barging is a whole other area that will, it sounds good, just get a barge and put the stuff on, but there are a lot of ramifications or implications to a barge. So he's chasing that down. I think we are going to find that he didn't really get too detailed into it before now, because he is knowledgeable about what it would take, and it was going to be even more than shipping on a steamship. So he didn't spend a lot of time looking at it. But the board wanted that information, and it's not a bad idea to have it anyway, because other people might think it's a good idea, or at least something worth looking at. So there's going to be probably kind of a supplemental report to that. But I'll get those out to you. And when you read it through, if you think there's other information that you want to have in order to prepare for this article at town meeting, let us know.
Not to get back up to cloud level here, but that's kind of what you said. It requires a new way of thinking. That's what I mean by the priorities is, at the end of our meetings here, we just say, okay, so, what's coming up? What's your priorities? Have they shifted? How have they changed? And even on a monthly basis there, you're still giving us an idea of what might be coming towards us. So there are unforeseen things always, but, if we're checking in with each other all the time and kind of, okay, well, Julia is now saying something different about the sewer system now than she was a month ago. And it just gives us, that helps us, again, like I said, understand, how you guys are working. And that's going to facilitate greater cooperation than if we just, I think we're trying to say we're proactively trying to really understand you more than we have in the past, right? I mean, that's the change of thinking.
Yep. So, great. Anything else on this?
One tiny little thing. Last year, we had, who was the year before? We had the chairman of the FinCom, maybe even the vice chair, remember the Kimby cabinet? And we talked about the budget instructions.
Yeah, I came with Matt, but I wasn't the vice chairman, so it was Matt and myself.
Okay, well, if you want to do that again, maybe
Yep,
sometime. in
absolutely.
September, let me know.
Absolutely.
On the budget thing, just a quick thing. David mentioned it, and I just wanted to sort of accentuate it. I personally would be much more in favor of looking, when you look at the budget in comparison, looking at what is changing.
The exceptions.
Exceptions.
Yeah.
I think if that would require maybe a little bit different presentation. But I'd be very much in favor of just looking at exceptions. I don't need to look at tons of material where nothing is basically changing a lot. What we're interested in is what are the changes.
From my perspective, so you have a budget charge. You can't go over 2.5%. You know what your fixed labor costs are going to be. You've got a whole bunch of other fixed costs that you're not going to be able to change. It strikes me that, we're not going to add a lot of value. It might make us feel good that, we went through and asked you how many pencils you're buying, but, that's your business.
At the end of the day.
But I think, where it starts to become, of interest to the town is if new programs are introduced, there's a plan to hire new people,
Yep.
and particularly for positions that have been approved or haven't been approved. Maybe the question is, we haven't filled positions over here, do we need to open new positions over there, do we transfer them? So deal with the exceptions rather than,
Yep.
and, I mean, do we need to know that the receipts from the embarkation fees are going to pay for the summer police? I assume that's who they pay for, hopefully. Do we need to know that yet again, this year? I mean, that's, I would like to know if that's a decision that's changed, that we're going to program the money elsewhere. To me, that's an exception. But if it's the same, it's,
What's changing?
Sure,
I mean,
yeah,
What's changing?
we, you guys are professionals. Personally, under Brian's stewardship, the town, I think the finance part of the town is in very, very good shape and well tended to. And, I'm not here to, and I don't think we're here to micromanage well, I know we're not here to micromanage business, and we'd like to put our time into some of these other,
Well,
and be more highly leveraged ourselves in the
if you
activity.
go back 7 or 8 years, that wasn't the case.
No, we're in a very different
And so
place.
we're in a very different mode now, I think, and that's why I think to say 7 or 8 years ago we should go on an exception basis, that I really had a big chuckle over that. But I think today it makes a lot of sense, it does.
So, anyway, great. Thank you for all coming out.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you very
for
much.
showing up, coming out on a nice summer afternoon.
Do we need to decide on the last agenda item, date of the next meeting?
Yeah.
Can we hold on doing that? Because I think, unless there's some pressing need to get together before the 18th, I think any supplemental work that we would do would probably be after the 18th. Is that okay? So our next meeting will be the 18th. So,
And we'll, that morning, I'll send everything out to you as soon as we can,
okay.
on the morning of the 18th.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Thank you very much.
Aye.
Have a nice weekend's almost upon us. Have a nice weekend.